Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Raw Marriage Podcast. I'm Rob Hollis.
And I'm Winona Hollis.
And we are your relationship experts, here not to talk about the fluff, but talk about the gritty side of marriage.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That's the not fluffy stuff of marriage.
Right. That's the stuff that's going to tear your marriage apart if you don't talk about it. So let's talk about it, and let's help make love last a lifetime.
Oh, dear God. What are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about woundedness, about how your wounds can unwittingly start to chip away at the core of your marriage. Can you see how that's possible?
Enlighten me. How is that possible?
All right. So let's take this out of marriage just for a moment in a way that will illustrate what can really go on underneath the surface of your marriage.
Okay.
You, last year, you had a pretty bad accident. Actually, you've had a couple of bad car accidents over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, none of them were your fault, but
None.
You ended up being the one that was most injured in all of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So last year, you ended up going through months and months of rehab and physical therapy and chiropractic care and everything to get you to a place where you were actually feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah? But then this past summer, just a few months ago, you experienced pain as if it was last summer right after the accident.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you start to ask yourself, well, why am I having this pain again? I dealt with it, right? I dealt with the pain. I went to see the professionals. I got it all taken care of, and yet the pain is back. And you didn't do anything.
Nothing.
It's not like you went out bungee jumping or pogo stick hopping or anything like that. You just started hurting again, and it was horrible. And so we went to another doctor, and that doctor started pressing in a particular area, right?
Yes.
On your back. And at first, it was like, okay, I can feel the thumbs, but it's not really painful yet. But then at one point, boom, it lit you up.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And we started talking about how there are layers, whether it be layers in your soft tissue or even layers emotionally, that if someone presses too deep, it triggers that trauma, and you can become guarded. Now, in this case, you knew what happened. You knew where the pain came from. In fact, you went in expecting her to hit that pain trigger point. And so you were able to not have a bad reaction towards the doctor.
Exactly.
Now, when this happens in marriage, unexpectedly, your spouse might press on something not even knowing that there's trauma underneath the surface, right? You see where I'm going with this? And so whenever they get to that deep place that they didn't even know was a pain. In fact, you might not have even realized. In these cases, you may not even realize what caused the trauma. It could be a collection of a conglomeration of things that all combine to create this painful spot.
Okay.
On your heart. And then someone says something or does something and it triggers that trauma, triggers that pain. And since you're not expecting it, what do?
Start going off the handle.
Yeah, you lash out, you blow up. Yeah. It becomes a toxic situation, but not because you have a bad reaction. Well, it's because you have a bad reaction, but it's not really your fault. It is a natural reaction to someone touching that trauma spot. And it's also not your spouse's fault because he didn't realize that trauma spot was there. For just about anyone else in the world, that would not have been a painful point. But now you start to realize, I'm dealing with trauma. I'm still dealing with it. In some cases, you may have even felt like you dealt with it before.
Yeah.
You may have even felt like I've been to a counselor, I've been to a therapist, I've gotten through, I've gotten rid of the soul ties, I've gotten rid of all the, I understand what this other person did to me. I get it, and I'm past it, and I'm all good now. But it's still in there. It's still in there deep. So, what do you think a couple can do whenever that trauma point, whenever that pressure point is hit? you realize that you're becoming guarded because of that wound. You're trying to protect that wound. But at the same time, you realize you got to let your spouse in. How do you do that?
Well, I would say one, definitely need to go to the head counselor, which is God. And then also go to a professional, a licensed therapist, counselor, to talk it out. And I think it'll be definitely good. I mean, it's good to do that, one-on-one with but also to take your spouse with you to the session, so that way you can, like I said, to talk through it. So
you make a good point. Sometimes things need to be worked out solo between you and your therapist, and that's not to cut your spouse out. It's kind of like, does your spouse need to be in the OR with you when the doctor is doing surgery? No. No, he doesn't. No, she doesn't. The professional is going to do their job, and sometimes it needs some one-on-one time with the patient, with the counselee, to work through those things. But also, at the same time, not at the same time, but in a different session, husband and wife should be together so the spouse understands what the other spouse is going through.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's not just a matter of coming home and saying, oh yeah, this is what the doctor said, this is what the therapist said, and I'm going to need your help with this. And a lot of times, the therapist is going to be able to explain things to the spouse to help create a better environment for the one who's ailing. And so it's such a show of support and trust to let your spouse go to these therapy sessions solo, but also be willing to go by their side in times that the therapist calls for it. Wow. So woundedness in marriage. How can you see things going off the rails for a couple if they don't deal with it? What could that lead to?
Really?
Because how do you get there?
Yeah, you start stuffing stuff. I mean, hate to say it that way, but you do stuff. You just keep stuffing,
right?
Until it's compacted, and then next thing you know, then you explode, and next thing you know, it's when you explode, it's when it's too late.
There is a theory, and it's not just a theory. It plays out, and I've seen this play out.
Okay.
Whenever your spouse touches one of your trauma points, your trigger points, there's a natural reaction. It's part of the guardedness. The way you protect that trauma spot is to go on the offensive. When you go on the offensive, you're like, okay, well, I'm going, and it's not something you do consciously. It's a reaction. It's a natural reaction. You said something, you did something that hurt me. I'm going to turn around and do something that hurts you. I'm not doing it on purpose. Your spouse is not doing that on purpose, but they're doing it without the conscience, without the realization, the knowledge of what they're doing. It's a reaction.
Okay.
Now, how does this play out, right? I say something or do something that touches your trauma. You hurt. And you turn around and do or say something that hurts me.
Oh, so that.
And then what's my reaction?
So now you're doing tit for tat, which is not what you're supposed to do.
Well, it's not really tit for tat. What it is a reaction. Okay. It's a natural reaction. It's the offensive that comes after, in response to being guarded. If you're getting too close to this wounded space, I'm going to naturally do something. Tit for tat is more of a conscious thing, right?
It is?
It is. That's how I see it anyway, right?
Okay.
So if I do something to you, like I go and you have 3 cookies on your plate, I grab one.
You know not to mess with my cookies.
Tit for tat.
I'm just saying.
Okay. Tit for tat would mean whenever you're not looking, I'm going to go take something off your plate and let you know, don't take my cookies, right? Or the other way around, because I took one off of your plate.
And I will take one off your plate.
And when I'm not looking, you're going to take something off of my plate.
Yeah.
That is a conscious tit for tat.
Okay. But you said the other thing is not conscious, though.
The other thing is not conscious.
Okay.
I don't turn around and do something to hurt you intentionally. It is a reaction. It is a sort of like a reflex.
Okay.
And in that reflex, at a low level, what my goal is to protect, is to guard that trauma spot that you touched.
Okay.
And so I do something. I say something. Kind of gets you out of that zone. And it works, but your reaction is to do the same thing. Again, you don't do it consciously. It's a reaction. And this becomes a downward spiral to the point where you get all the way down at this really bottom level, this really bad place, and you don't even know how you got there. You don't know why this downward spiral started, and you don't know how it kept going.
Okay.
Now, when a couple understands this dynamic in their relationship, it only takes one of them, it only takes one to say, it's going to stop here. I could find myself about to say something that is in reaction to her hurting me. And if in that moment I say to myself, wait, stop, pump the brakes, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to do that. I realize it's in retaliation. And even if it means swallowing your pride and just stepping back from the situation, that right there could be all the difference between staying married for decades or filing for divorce next year. Because again, whenever you get on that downward spiral, it's very difficult to pull out without the conscious stopping of it.
But why do you think somebody would get to that point, though? That is it. I mean, like, okay, so you wouldn't get to that point if you start talking about those things in the very beginning of your relationship. It's really good to get all of everything out. If you really love that person, you really love your spouse, talk about the hard things. Yeah. I mean, the very hard things that you don't want to talk about, talk about them. I mean, because again, it does no good to stuff.
You're right. Two answers to your question.
Okay.
One question is, how do you get there?
Yeah.
How do you get that low in your relationship off of a little spat?
But was it a little spat?
Have you heard of bad blood?
Yes.
You can have bad blood between spouses.
Okay.
And whenever I say that, it's talking about how things just get so, I can't stand what she did, and you start looking at your spouse a little different way. It just kind of chips away at that love. It chips away at the respect every time one of those trauma points are hit. And you start to fall out of the feeling of love. Now, you do realize that there's two sides of love, right? There's the feeling and there's the action.
I know this.
Right, the feeling and the verb.
I know this, but do they know that?
So even in times where I don't feel like I love my spouse,
and there is times
I can still do loving things. I can still love her, even if in the moment I don't feel in love with her. And we all get there. We're all human. And then whenever I look at you after I do a few of these loving things for you, I look at you and say, wow, you are the most amazing, beautiful person I have ever met. And I'm good. And then she does something again, and I'm like, no, I'm just playing.
Are you there?
You never do anything that upsets me.
Okay.
So yeah, there's bad blood. You can get to a point where you don't even know why you're feeling this anger inside, but it's because you never resolve these traumas, and the trauma just keeps getting hit time after time. And then you also say, well, how could you possibly get there if you all talk about it before you get married or even at the beginning of the marriage? Well, here's the thing. You don't always know where your trauma points are.
Well, that is true. But the reason why I said what I said is because if you do talk about everything, some of those things are trauma points. And we are going to talk, because again, we talk about different things in raw marriage. Okay. it might be sexual past, and what I mean by that is, somebody could have did something, and then that's a trigger right there. I mean, it's several different reasons. A lot of people, they just take in, they want to compact, stuff, but that's not good to do. Like I said, you're stuffing it. But then it gets to a point, and then somebody just does that, and then next thing you know, blew off the handle and stuff like that. But if somebody,
why'd you try to rip my arm off?
Yeah, but
I ain't trying to rip your arm off. I just tapped it with a love tap.
Yeah.
But you realize what could have happened? You could have ripped my arm off.
Yeah. So then it goes into all that, and then you be like, well, why are you reacting like that?
Exactly.
Because somebody touched your arm like that. And so it went straight to them actually probably grabbing your arm a little too rough.
So what I might suggest in this situation is that, I might not realize that I have this reaction to someone touching my shoulder like that. So I can't even warn you off about it. I can't even articulate beforehand, preemptively, to say, you might want to stay away from my shoulder because if you touch it the wrong way, I'm going to feel like you're trying to rip it off. Like, what? You'd be like, what? I'd be like, I wouldn't even know to say that. However, whenever it happens, and there's this reaction, the worst thing a couple can do is what?
Yell at each other?
Well, that is the worst thing. And what that really amounts to is trying to resolve it on their own. Yeah. They feel that raising their voices will win the battle.
Oh my gosh!
Right?
Well.
And I'll start loud talking you, and you'll start loud talking me, and then we're on this shouting match, right? But we're not resolving anything. We're just trying to outshout each other. We're never getting to the core issue. The key thing to do there
is what?
Is go see a counselor. It might get to the point of needing therapy, but you know what? What we always say is that therapy is for couples who are in crisis and want to recover from that crisis.
Okay.
Counseling helps you from needing that. Counseling helps you from getting into crisis to begin with.
Yeah.
So if you see something like this starting to happen, you're starting to see some rifts start to develop because of something that seems to be superficial, go see a counselor then. Don't wait until you're in crisis. See a counselor so you can avoid being in crisis. Yeah.
So in other words, counselors they do the maintenance, where the therapist is really going to get in there and...
I see counselors like your PCP.
Okay.
You should go see your PCP physically at least every 6 months, right? But emotionally, we're a whole lot more fragile than our bodies are. So you might want to go see your marriage PCP.
I would say every 3 to 6 months. And
I'd say once a month.
Well, that's true.
At least once a month, and just say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we observed, and as you share those parts of your life with your counselor, you can get these minor course corrections as opposed to waiting until you have to turn an aircraft carrier on a dime, because that ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
A lot of times people wait to get counseling until they're in crisis. They spent years getting there and expect to take a weekend or a month to get out of it. No.
Like, not at all. That's definitely not going to work.
You've got to maintain your marriage with intentionality. And that's what we talk about. In fact, right there is an invitation. If you're watching this and you realize, hey, our marriage is good and we want to keep it good, I encourage you to check out our companion couples program.
Yeah.
Whenever someone's on that program, it's like a subscription basis. It's almost like having us on retainer, but you get a counseling session every month, and it ends up being like half the price of an unsubscription counseling session.
That's true.
And you say, well, I don't know, I'm going to make it every month. You can actually roll a session over to the next month. you have the intentionality of working on your marriage, maintaining it, so you stay at not just a high level, but also look at how to improve your marriage every month as opposed to just surviving in it. We love you for being a part of this podcast. We love you for joining us and listening to what we have to say. And please, please, please take this home, receive it, and understand that if your spouse has a bad reaction to something that you say or do, it's probably not about you.
Yeah.
Take a moment.
Sometimes, yes, not all the time.
Take a moment to understand. That's a page out of Proverbs. Take a moment to understand. Mm-hmm. Try to not react to it. And if this is something that is really starting to tear you guys apart, then you really need to talk to someone instead of trying to work it out yourself.
Exactly.
So with that, we are your relationship experts.
Yes, we are.
I'm Rob Hollis.
And I'm Winona Hollis.
And we're here to help you make love last a lifetime.
Yes, we are.